On to another interview for you, because the cybersecurity industry is booming with no signs of slowing down. According to market research firm Zion, the sector will reach over $181 billion in global revenue by 2021. That's partly driven by corporate fears of hacks and losing confidential information as the scale and frequency of major hacking attacks continues to rise around the world. Now, one key tech giant is betting big on cybersecurity. It's IBM. The company announced a rollout of the IBM Z, its next-generation mainframe that's capable of handling 12 billion encrypted transactions a day. The mainframe seeks to address cyber attacks which have compromised financial data. Joining us now to discuss from Cambridge, Massachusetts, is IBM Vice President of Threat Intelligence, Caleb Barlow from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Caleb. And first of all, talk to us about the new Z14 mainframe. You're working with companies. They've advised you that they want encryption. How big a departure, how big a step, a revolution is this?
Well, this is actually a really big deal. In fact, this is the largest innovation on the Z platform in a decade. And what this really involves is looking at encryption and how we make it pervasive. So in this particular case, we're talking about a system that, as you mentioned, can process 12 billion transactions a day. Now, to put this in perspective, let's take something like Cyber Monday as an example. Now, on Cyber Monday, we see maybe 30 million transactions globally. This single system can process up to 12 billion transactions a day. Now, part of the technology that comes into play in this is this new chip. Now, on this chip, we have over 6.1 billion devices, 14.4 miles of wire. And there are 24 of these in a single new IBM Z.
How difficult was it to do? How much R&D, how much time? Because you were doing this over the course of 2 years with, 150 companies you're talking to.
Yeah, so we worked with a variety of companies, including companies like Highmark Healthcare, who services about 50 million Americans in the Pittsburgh area, along with companies like ADP. And, what's really important to our customer base is that they have a way to encrypt traffic and encrypt data. If we look over the last 5 years, over 9 billion records lost or stolen, and only 4% of those were encrypted. Now, why is that the case? Well, historically, it has been simply too expensive, and I don't mean expensive just in terms of money, expensive in terms of processing time in order to encrypt all of that data. So one of the things the new IBM System Z does is makes that encryption everywhere pervasively possible.
How expensive is it, therefore, if I want to upgrade to this new mainframe?
Well, for new customers, this new mainframe costs about $500,000. But when we consider that the average cost of a data breach is about $3.6 million, this is a pretty good bargain considering the threat that's out there. And of course, those numbers go up or down depending on the number of transactions and the configuration that a particular client might have.
And have you got clients already locked in, considering you've been working with them on this, understanding what they want and what they need? How big a mass adoption do you need for this to really make inroads?
Well, because we've worked very tightly with clients along the way, we know that this is something that is badly needed. And let's put it this way. 2015 was a great example of the problem. In 2015, in fact, just the first half of 2015, 100 million people lost their healthcare records. Now, those healthcare records contain immutable data, data that can't change, like your social security number, the fact that you have diabetes, your mother's maiden name. Now, if we think about that, that's roughly 1 in 3 Americans lost this data forever. If that data had been encrypted, all the bad guys would have is gibberish that they couldn't even read. So that's why this is so important to us. You see, you have to remember that most of what we're dealing with is organized crime on the tune of a $445 billion industry every year. So if we can pervasively lay down encryption on top of our data, we can change the economics for the bad guys, making it more difficult and more expensive for them to get access to our critical data.
How much do we need the whole ecosystem to take this on, though? Because clearly, if one company starts encrypting their data, that helps in some means. But there's so much interconnection between businesses nowadays. How much of the entire corporate America, for example, do you need to get on board and use this if you're going to be able to stave off these sorts of attacks?
Well, you know, you're on a very key point here. Encryption and having encryption pervasively is incredibly important, especially when we talk about large transaction volumes. Now, the beauty of this is most people end up having their data on a System Z and they may not even realize it. In fact, you know, 87% of all credit card transactions occur on System Z. So part of what we're trying to do here is make this possible, and then you're absolutely right. What we need to do is make sure that encryption occurs everywhere, regardless of what platform it operates on, because it's simply so important to protect our data.
And what about regulators? How are they reacting to this? Because many have a headache when it comes to encryption for our own use of communication when it comes to the likes of WhatsApp that's owned by Facebook. Are they going to be able to access some of this encrypted data if needs be?
Well, the keys are in the hands of the customer, generally speaking. So in those cases, they would need to go to the individual that actually owns the system and get access to those keys. But remember, we're talking about back-end transaction systems. We're not talking about like a phone or a consumer device that has, for example, GPS information and things like that. You know, I think we can all agree, if we're talking about our travel records, our banking records, our healthcare data, I think these are things that as a society, we can all agree best kept in a locked-up safe.
I agree. IBM Vice President of Threat Intelligence, Caleb Barlow, great to have you live from Boston, Massachusetts. Of course, thank you very much indeed for joining us.